All right, let's get right into it. We're looking at a case from Nashik, India that it exploded. It all started with a single family's complaint, and before you knew it, it became this massive national debate about crime, religion, and the responsibility of one of the biggest companies in the country.
Wow. That quote right there, that was the explosive claim that really set this whole thing on fire. But you gotta ask, right? What did that actually mean? And what was the evidence behind it? Let's break it all down.
So what was this really all about? Well, the central accusation was intense. The claim was that there was an organized grooming gang operating from inside a center for Tata Consultancy Services, TCS.
And this is where this one term, love jihad, becomes absolutely central to the whole story. Suddenly, the conversation shifts. This isn't just being framed as a crime anymore. No, it's being presented as part of a much bigger, perceived ideological mission.
Okay, so you've got this huge allegation swirling around, but how does it go from just talk to a full-blown police investigation?
Well, that's where the story gets even more interesting.
So it all kicked off with just one family's concern about their daughter, but what followed was pretty extraordinary. It actually triggered a 42-day covert police operation. And get this, to figure out what was happening inside, police sent female officers undercover, posing as housekeeping staff just to get first-hand evidence.
And that undercover work, it seems it made a real difference, because by the end of it, 9 different women felt safe enough to come forward and file official police complaints. We're talking FIRs. So what were once just whispers were now formal, on-the-record accusations.
So, with the evidence from the undercover officers and those 9 official complaints in hand, the police made their move. The whole operation ended with the arrest of 8 TCS employees.
All right, and this is the point where the story takes a really sharp turn. It expands way beyond a workplace crime investigation into this much bigger and way more controversial theory, which got the name corporate jihad.
So let's look at the actual allegations made by the victims, because they are incredibly specific and go way beyond simple workplace harassment. We're talking about claims of being forced to eat beef, having their Hindu deities and religious practices mocked, and being constantly pressured to convert to Islam. But it gets even more serious. Some said their workload was deliberately increased if they resisted advances, and the most severe allegations involve being falsely promised marriage, which then led to rape, blackmail, and sexual assault. And get this, a key part of the complaint was that an HR official allegedly ignored 78 emails warning about what was going on.
And the theory didn't stop at the Indian border. No, some claimed this was part of a much bigger, international network. The allegation was that these women were being recruited with plans to smuggle them to Malaysia. There were even claims that they were put on video calls with a preacher over there.
This quote from a BJP politician, Shalini, really sums up the whole argument. The idea that this wasn't just some isolated incident, but a whole new front in a bigger ideological war. After land jihad and love jihad, corporate jihad. This narrative really got amplified by politicians. One even suggested there might be as many as 50 victims, though it's important to note that number was never confirmed.
But of course, that's just one side of the story. As you can probably guess, a really powerful counter-narrative started to form. One that looked at these exact same events in a completely different light.
So you basically end up with these 2 competing views, right? On one side, you have the corporate jihad view, an organized ideological plot. And on the other, the isolated crime view. A serious workplace crime, for sure, but one that's being twisted to push a false communal narrative. So was it a conspiracy, or was it an attempt to demonize an entire community based on the horrible actions of a few people? That was the huge divide.
And this quote right here from Talaha Rashidi, it gets right to the heart of that fear from the other side. The concern that this wasn't about justice anymore, but about putting an entire community on trial. That the actions of a few were being used to demonize the Muslim population as a whole.
So people pushing this viewpoint had a pretty straightforward argument. Look, this is a criminal matter, not a communal one. Let's focus on getting justice for the victims and punishing the people who did this, whatever their religion is. They also brought up the fact that concepts like love jihad have been dismissed by the government and parliament before. So when you strip away the shouting and the headlines, what are we left with? Well, this whole controversy really forces us to zoom out and ask some pretty big questions, not just about this case, but about our society.
First off, what about the company's role in all this? I mean, what is the responsibility of a huge corporation when its own systems failed to protect its employees? Remember that allegation that an HR official ignored 78 emails about what was happening? That raises some massive questions about corporate governance.
Then there's the role of the media and politics. How does that intense focus shape how we all understand a really complex criminal case? I mean, think about it. The way this story was framed and talked about had a huge impact on what people believed the truth was.
And that brings us to the biggest question of all, the one that's still kind of hanging in the air. Where do you draw the line? Where does an isolated criminal act end and a systemic, ideologically driven pattern begin? The TCS Nashik case leaves us right there, at that complicated intersection of crime, culture, and corporate life, with a lot to think about.